What if the man trained to protect his country was secretly hunting its citizens? What if the uniform you trust was hiding a predator? He wasn't just a soldier. He was a cook in the 82nd Airborne, stationed at one of the largest military bases in America. But behind barracks walls and quiet suburban streets, he unleashed horrors no battlefield ever saw. This is the chilling true story of Ronald Gray, the U.S. Army specialist turned serial killer, and why, despite a death sentence approved by the president, he's still alive. Ronald Adrin Gray was born in Cochran, Georgia, but spent most of his childhood in the rough streets of Liberty City, a public housing project in Miami, Florida. At just 18 years old, he enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1984, hoping to find purpose, or perhaps a new identity. Gray was initially assigned to the Target Acquisition Battery, 1st Battalion, 39th Field Artillery, but by the time of his arrest, he had risen to the rank of Specialist 4E4 and was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He served as a cook with the 3rd Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, part of the elite 82nd Airborne Division. To his superiors and fellow soldiers, Gray was just another disciplined serviceman. But behind that uniform was a man living a monstrous double life, one filled with darkness, violence, and secrets that would soon erupt into national headlines. Between April 1986 and January 1987, Gray committed a series of increasingly violent crimes, targeting women near and within the Fort Bragg area. On April 1986, the first known attack, Gray broke into the home of a woman near Fort Bragg. He raped her at knife point, but allowed her to live. She reported the attack, but he wasn't immediately linked to it. On April 27, 1986, Gray murdered civilian Linda Jean Coates, age 23, a student at nearby Campbell University.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
On December 11, 1986, Gray abducted, raped, and murdered a second civilian, Tammy Kofer Wilson, age 18. On December 15, 1986, Gray abducted, raped, sodomized, and murdered Private Laura Lee Vickery Clay, age 18. She disappeared from Fort Bragg. 2 witnesses saw her at a local Kmart with a man later identified as Gray. Vickery Clay's car was found the next morning, a block from her home. It appeared to have been driven through the woods. The driver's seat was set farther back than necessary for Vickery Clay to drive. 3 of Gray's fingerprints were found on the hood of the car. On January 17, 1987, a soldier discovered Vickery Clay's half-naked and decomposed body in the woods near Fort Bragg. She had been raped, sodomized, and shot in the neck, forehead, chest, and back. She had also suffered blunt force trauma to various parts of her body. The murder weapon, a .22 caliber pistol that Gray had stolen in November 1986, was found 60 feet from the victim's body. On January 3, 1987, he raped and attempted to murder Private Marianne Lang Namath, age 19. Gray entered her barracks room under the pretense of notification of a party that he did not want to leave on the barracks notification board. Once inside, Gray grabbed Namath, held a knife to her throat, and asked for her military field gear. Gray tied Namath's hands behind her, removed her underclothing, and raped her. Gray then stabbed her repeatedly in the neck and on the side of her body, threatening to return and kill her if she screamed. Namath suffered a lacerated trachea and a collapsed lung, but she survived. When Gray's photograph appeared in the news following his arrest for another crime, Namath identified him as her assailant. 3 days later, on January 6th, Kimberly and Ruggles, a 23-year-old local cab driver, was dispatched to Gray's address to pick up a passenger named Ron on the evening of January 6th. In the early morning of January 7th, military police officers on routine patrol discovered Ruggles' empty cab parked at the edge of the woods. Her nude body was discovered a short distance away. She was found raped, beaten, and stabbed 37 times to death. Ruggles' mouth had been gagged with a cloth belt that matched a pair of black karate pants other police officers had found in Gray's possession hours earlier. Gray's fingerprints were on the interior door handle of Ruggles' taxi, and Ruggles' fingerprints were found on money in Gray's possession. Gray's footprints were also found at the scene of the crime. On the morning of January 3, 1987, a young civilian woman, the surviving victim, was alone in her apartment near Fort Bragg when Ronald Gray broke in through her door. He wasn't there to rob her. He came armed, focused, and he was prepared to kill. He raped her at knife point, methodical and merciless. Then he bound her tightly, determined to leave no witnesses behind. But Gray made one critical mistake. In a brief moment of distraction, seconds, really, she broke free. She ran, bleeding, barefoot, terrified, but alive. And that decision would change everything, because her escape was the beginning of the end for Ronald Gray. She gave a detailed description of her attacker and his vehicle to police. Within just 3 days, the Fayetteville Police Department sprang into action. They ran the survivor's description through military personnel records, cross-checked it against a backlog of unsolved rapes and assaults, and the pattern became disturbingly clear. All signs pointed to one man, Ronald Gray, a 24-year-old Army specialist stationed at Fort Bragg. He had prior reports of suspicious behavior, and his vehicle matched witness descriptions. Police located and arrested Gray on January 6, 1987. Inside his possession, the keys to Kimberly and Ruggles' cab, blood-stained clothing and other forensic evidence, a knife, later matched to the wounds found on Ruggles' body. While in custody, Ronald Gray partially confessed to several attacks, providing information that only the perpetrator could know. Detectives later used DNA evidence, survivor testimony, his own admissions, to tie him to multiple unsolved rapes and murders. And so, the first trial began in North Carolina State Court, where Ronald Gray was charged with murder, rape, kidnapping, and assault. In 1987, the jury returned its verdict, guilty on all counts. The punishment? 3 consecutive life sentences. No chance of parole. No way out. Justice had spoken. But the story was far from over. You see, Ronald Gray hadn't only targeted civilians. He had also committed crimes on U.S. military property and against fellow soldiers. One of his victims was Private Laura Lee Vickery Clay, a 19-year-old servicewoman who was found raped, shot, and dumped near Fort Bragg. The military couldn't ignore what he'd done on their watch. And because some crimes happened on base, and others involved military personnel, Ronald Gray fell under the jurisdiction of both civilian and military justice systems. So even after his life sentences in state court, the U.S. Army charged him again, this time under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And this time they wanted death. In April 1988, Ronald Gray was brought before a general court-martial at Fort Bragg. The courtroom was lined with decorated officers, and the charges read like a litany of evil. 2 counts of premeditated murder, 3 counts of rape, robbery, attempted murder, burglary, sodomy. Prosecutors laid out the horror. He used his uniform to lure victims into false safety. He stalked women on and off base. He tortured them. He killed without hesitation. They played the surviving victims' testimonies, the forensics, his confession. And in July 1988, Ronald Gray became the first U.S. soldier in over 25 years to receive a military death sentence. The commanding general approved it. Military appellate courts upheld it. Then, in 2008, President George W. Bush signed the execution order, the first by a U.S. president in decades. But that wasn't the end. You might think a presidential execution order seals a man's fate, but not in Ronald Gray's case. For over 60 years now, the U.S. military has sentenced men to die, but never followed through. And no one really talks about it. To understand why, you need to understand how military justice works. It's governed by the Uniform Code of Military Justice, or UCMJ. Unlike civilian death penalty cases, military executions require a court-martial conviction, a review by military appellate courts, approval from a commanding general, and final authorization from the President of the United States. No presidential approval, no execution, period. That means even if a soldier is found guilty and sentenced to death, the military can't carry it out until the president signs off. The legal appeals are endless. Military death sentences go through years of mandatory legal review. Appeals can stall a case for 30 to 40 years or more. In this case, federal courts stepped in with appeals citing mental health concerns, constitutional challenges, and potential procedural errors during his trial. Every year that passes brings new legal challenges. Many inmates raise claims of mental competency, intellectual disability, PTSD, procedural misconduct. There is no active execution facility. The military does not maintain a ready execution chamber. Fort Leavenworth hasn't executed anyone in over 60 years and would need to rebuild lethal injection protocols from scratch. Changing public and global opinion. Support for the death penalty has steadily declined in the U.S. And executing soldiers, especially for crimes committed during or near combat, carries international and diplomatic risks. All these make executions harder to justify and easier to block. So here's the truth. The military still hands down death sentences. The courts still uphold them. Presidents still have the final say. But no one pulls the trigger. Ronald Gray wore the uniform. He swore to serve. And he slaughtered without remorse. Convicted. Sentenced. Even marked for death by the president himself. But over 3 decades later, he's still breathing. A soldier turned predator, protected not by mercy, but by a system too paralyzed to finish what it started. So ask yourself, is justice delayed still justice at all? If this story gripped you, don't just scroll past. Subscribe to Deadline Files. We're counting down the last hours of the condemned. Every episode takes you deeper inside death row. The executed, the waiting, the possibly innocent. Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next story. Because some sentences are final and some never end.